Okay, good morning. So we're up to Siman Shin Ches, continuing working through the halachas of Muktzeh. We're up to Seif Chof Ches, Shin Ches Chof Ches. Says the Mechaber, Chavile Eitzim, bundles of wood, v'kash and straw, Sheheskina l'maychel behema, which he said he prepared to feed his animals. Afilu hem gedolim harbe, even if they're very large. Mutzeh l'taltlon, you're allowed to move it. It's not a problem of muktzeh. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Chavili eitzim hainu sheim rakim. They're soft wood. T'chazu l'maychel behema. It's good for animal food, and therefore this is not muktzeh. Sheheskinon hainu shehezminon. He designated this wood for animal food, and therefore it's not muktzeh. Avol beloi hazmon, but without designating it, afilu ehem chavilas katanas, even if they're small pieces of wood, also l'taltlon. For time of the summer, and the reason is because they're used normally for firewood. And therefore, even if they could be used for Michael Behema, it's also Kash Shelonu, our straw, the stam straw used in the times of the Mogan Avram was used for sleeping, to sleep on Oile Michael Behema or for animal food. It depends very much on the custom of your location. If it's used ordinarily for building or to cover the roof, then you've got a problem. Then stam would be muktzeh, and therefore you need to do hazmona. You need to designate it beforehand. Okay, choftes. Kol sheroi lemaychel chayav v'oif hamitzuyim. Any food which is you could give to animals which are motzui, which are common, which are regular in your location, you're allowed to move it. It's not muktzeh. But if this food is only royal for animals which are very rare, which are not really found in your area, so then it depends. Then, if you've got those animals, then fine. V'im lav, but if you haven't got those animals, then it's also. Well, if Fizeh says Ramah, you're allowed to move bones which have become detached from meat, if they're fit for animals, for dogs. Why? Because dogs are motzui. So what's the rule of this seif? The rule is, animal food is mutter, animal food is not muktzeh, so long as those animals are motzeh in town. But if you've got animals which are not motzeh, they're no good. So for example, if you've got, like he says, bones, they're good for dogs, and therefore they're not muktzeh. But if you've got, let's say, you've got peacocks are not particularly common pets, but you've got little reptiles, little snakes that you could feed them. So if you've got peacocks in town, then these dead snakes or whatever, that's what you feed them, that's okay. But if you haven't got peacocks there, then the food that you would give the peacocks are also muktzeh. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah. So we're on the Mishnah Berurah on Sif Chof Tes, Shin Ches, Sif Chof Tes, Kufyu Tes, She'enom Metzuyim. Most people don't have these animals. Just because a few wealthy people have got some peacocks in their back garden, that doesn't make it motzui. If it's food which are for animals who are motzui, even though you haven't got that min, even if I haven't got a dog at home, but dogs eat this type of meat, then that meat will become no longer muktzeh. If the bones became detached from the meat on Erev Shabbos, then fine. And kolshken if they became detached on Shabbos. Why? Because in Erev Shabbos they were roy for human consumption. And therefore for sure they're not muktzeh. If there are no dogs in that town, then gamba ifenzeh osel taltal. I think nowadays it's hard to find a town without dogs. Antwerp, really? It still is. Okay. Lamed, Seif Lamed, Garine Tamarim, pits of dates. If you were to give that to animals in a place where you'd give that to animals, Muktzeh l'taltalon, you're allowed to touch them, to move them. They're no problem with muktzeh. But an Adam Choshev doesn't normally deal with these sort of things, gets his hands dirty by moving pits of dates, and therefore he should only do it with a shinui. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, but in a place where you don't normally feed pits of dates to animals, even though inherently they are good for animal food, but still, if there aren't these animals, or if it's not the derech to feed animals this in your location, then they're going to be muktzeh. But an adam chashuv should be machmir. Hatam, the reason is there are places where you don't even give this to animals. And you'd only give it to animals if other things weren't available, and if you've got nothing else. And therefore an adam chashuv should avoid it. You move it by with a shinui of some form or shape. Okay, Lamed Aleph. Now this is interesting. What about raw meat? We had this Shabbos. So I was just telling you. So we got back Friday morning, and we were meant to get back at 9 o'clock on Friday morning. So my wife had prepared, and someone had come to the house and taken out some raw meat on Thursday to put it, and so she was going to make a chulent. But it so happens we were diverted the flight and went to Glasgow. We didn't get back till 4 o'clock, 2 hours before Shabbos, because we had to take the train from Scotland back to London. So in the end, we told the lady she hasn't got time to make the chulent, to go to Orach or wherever and to buy the chulent. So I saw in the drawer in the fridge on Shabbos some raw meat, right? So what's the status of raw meat on Shabbos? Muktzeh, non muktzeh. So that's mamish this sif. Lamed Aleph. Basar chai, raw meat, afilu tofel she'ena meluch klal. Even if it's raw and unsalted, mutter letaltala. You're allowed to move it. Why? Mishum dechazi leumtza, because you can eat meat raw. Right? For some people, it's a delicacy. You can eat it raw. V'chenim hu tofuach, and even if it's tofuach, pirush masriach, which means it's a bit smelly, mutter letaltala. You're allowed to do it. Mishum deroi leklovim, because animals would eat it. Nice chulent meat, an animal, a dog would be delighted with that. So therefore, it's not considered muktzeh. We'll see what the halacha is nowadays in the footnote. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah first. Kuf chafeich tuchazil umtza. So therefore, raw meat is you can eat it raw, and therefore it's not muktzeh. Hainu, says the Mishnah Berurah, Kuf chafei sheyesh bnei adam shadaitem yafa v'koisim basachai. There are those people who are quite chilled and they will happily eat raw meat. Shein issa b'achilas mishum dam. There's no problem of dam. You haven't done melicha to it. Because the rule is, this is the rule is, if you've done the hadocha, which is the rinsing of the meat, when you're eating it raw, so that even though you haven't done melicha fully to it to extract all the dam, since the dam hasn't moved around inside, there are ways in which you're allowed to eat raw meat by just having done hadocha without having done melicha. We're talking about a very soft type of meat, like a dove or a bar avza, a geese or something like that. But if it was heavy ox meat or something like that, you can't chew it. Because that needs proper cooking for you to enjoy it. And that would be muktzeh. The Taz argues and says no. Even bossa behema, which is have not yet done melicha, you haven't cooked it, you haven't done melicha, mutter letaltale ein sham. V'chein el yerabes maskim ledina kataz. Ta'afilu bossa behema mutter letaltale. Even bossa behema you can move it. Or b'biah hagroch chelek. And the Gan also says that any type of meat can be eaten raw, and therefore it's not muktzeh. Ein sham balkein. Afshir isi behar b'achrenim shetiku divrei Magen Avram ledina b'makom hatchak yesh lismech al mikilin, to say that even bossa behema is not going to be muktzeh. So let's take a look at the footnote. This is in footnote 127, which is at the back of the sefer. So what is the halacha of raw meat today? Like I said, I found some raw meat in the drawer on the fridge on Shabbos. Well, what is the story nowadays? Do people eat meat raw and therefore it no longer doesn't have a status of muktzah? So in 127 he says the following: nowadays, nowadays, some poskim are of the view no one eats raw meat nowadays. I mean, is that what? Do people eat raw meat? What? It's a delicacy. Okay, so maybe it's come back into fashion. But that's very thin meat. But you could slice it.
It's not a little bit cooked.
Oh, so we're going to come to that in a second if it's a little bit cooked. But according to this, we'll see in a second, people don't eat raw meat. Nowadays people don't eat raw meat, and therefore it's got a status of muktzeh, even if it's chicken meat, which is which is more edible, even in a raw state. Therefore, it's nowadays raw meat is considered muktzeh. Jumped. In Shmir Shabbos, he says, how can people move raw meat nowadays? Because no one really eats raw meat nowadays. However, somewhere else, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman is quoted. He says, since the Gemara does say that raw meat could be eaten raw, but makom tzorech you can be makel. Now, if you jump to the next paragraph, meidach das hagorim yashuv sheim kayemes efsharis lahafshis abos b'Shabbos. If it's possible to sort of not cook, you can't cook on Shabbos, but to warm the meat a little bit. Kugoin al yedei hanachos al gabi kadeira. For example, you put this raw meat and you put it on top of a pot. Or you just soak it in like lukewarm water. So you're not cooking it, but you're doing some minimal type of cooking, which doesn't violate the issur of bishul on Shabbos. Ein habasa muktzah, because you can eat it, then it no longer is muktzah. Says Rabbi Yashiv. V'das hagonim nissen kareletz in Chutz Shani. He says kiven shemavua bataz she'af al pi she'ein derech lechol basa chai. You don't even though people don't normally eat meat raw, mikol makom ein lenechshav muktzah kiyom. Nevertheless, ein muktzah nechshav muktzah. It's not considered muktzah. Kiven she'seif seif roi hu lemaychel. At the end of the day, it is edible. It's just that we don't do it nowadays. Since the Gemara concludes the raw meat is edible, imkein gam bizmanenu. Even the nowadays, the nowadays people are more fastidious, they're more fussy, and therefore things that hasn't changed, because the Gemara says if you need to, needs must, if there's nothing else to eat, then you would eat raw meat. So in short, you've got machlokes nowadays whether raw meat is considered muktzah. According to the Orach HaShulchan, according to Moshe Feinstein and Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, that raw meat is muktzah, because nowadays we just don't eat raw meat. However, Rabbi Yashiv and Nissim Karenitz are of the view that the Maisa, the Gemara says that raw meat is edible, and that is the Ikkadin. And according to Rabbi Yashiv, since you could, warm it up a little bit, and according to what you're saying, there are some people nowadays who do eat it, and therefore it would be okay. Just to add, that frozen meat is definitely muktzah. So sometimes in the freezer, you open the freezer, you want to get the challah from the freezer or something from the freezer, and it's behind a piece of a big chunk of frozen meat. So then you've got a problem. So then that frozen meat is definitely muktzah, because that is.
Isn't it a form of tikkun to put it into mild water just to?
Yeah, I was wondering that, but I guess it's not sufficient tikkun, because you're just I don't know what you call this meat. Carpaccio. What is that? Very light.
It's very thinly sliced.
Yeah, but it's not completely raw.
It's
I
like
wouldn't be able to take it today.
Really?
Yeah, it's drowning.
Okay, so that's how Chazal, that's how the poskim deal with raw meat.